It's my great pleasure to invite Julianne. We have brought her out from Australia this week because yesterday we had a workshop which a number of you attended, and we've got her speaking today. On Tuesday she's talking to another group of people, and tomorrow I'm taking her to Auckland Uni to help a bunch of the Christian groups there and do some training so that they can reach their friends. Thank you for coming, and I'm sure you'll introduce yourself a little bit more. I won't take up your time that has started ticking already.
Thank you. Well, great to be here. I enjoyed yesterday, and I hope you've been mulling on some things since yesterday. I actually worked in student ministry for 20 years, 7 years at La Trobe Uni and then 13 years at Melbourne Uni, and so I'm really excited about going tomorrow because I haven't stepped foot into a uni for 6.5 years while I've been working for City to City. And City to City is an organisation that, I don't know if you've heard of Tim Keller, who, so some of you have. He's he's now since died, but really great minister. And he basically felt really called to go to Manhattan in New York and went, it was actually a really low percentage of people who were Christians in Manhattan at the time. And he basically said, if all of us churches work together, we might be able to actually move it up a bit. So they went from, I think, 1% to 3%, and then 3% to 5%. And now they're really working towards all churches, seeing if they can get it to 15%. Like they're really going hard. And so lots of people could see that this was going on in Manhattan, and so they just asked Tim Keller, can you help us work this out in our city? So it was basically from New York to another city, so that's why it's called City to City. And so it's been, I've been working with City to City in Australia for 6.5 years, and we get beside churches because we want to see them flourish, basically, and we want to see lots of people come to faith, discipled, and when a church is flourishing, we try and help them church plant as they turn around. And I go around and help churches with evangelism. So I'm away 40 weekends a year, and I absolutely love coming to all different churches to really, help us think about evangelism. Now, this passage, I'm going to be speaking from Colossians 4, 2-6, and it's Paul writing to the Colossians, and they are brand new Christians. So I'm going to read it out in a minute. They're brand new Christians, and Paul is writing to them from prison. And he's in prison because he's been talking about his faith, and he's trying to really encourage the Colossians in their faith. So this is sort of basic 101, what do you do when you're so petrified about talking about your faith? And so I've got 4 PR words that come out of this. And I'm hoping that we'll just go through the basics, basically, around how do we go about evangelism. So I'll just read this out. Devote yourselves to prayer, being watchful and thankful, and pray for us too, that God may open a door for our message, so that we may proclaim the mystery of Christ, for which I am in chains. Pray that I may proclaim it clearly as I should. Be wise in the way you act towards outsiders. Make the most of every opportunity. Let your conversation be always full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone. And I sort of love this in terms of Paul writing to the Colossians to really encourage them to keep speaking about their faith. And so this is, I think, a real encouragement to us. Because, in New Zealand and Australia, we're pretty nervous about speaking about our faith, is my impression. All right, the first PR word is to pray. And it says, devote yourselves to prayer. So I'm going to ask you a question. You don't have to answer it, but I am going to get you to answer some things, if that's okay. Paul's saying here, devote yourselves to prayer, is really wanting us to be on. So I'm going to sort of give a hypothetical. So say if God decided to answer everyone from Journey Church, he decided, I'm actually going to answer all your prayers that you've prayed for in the last week. So from this Sunday to last Sunday. And so, would anyone have become a Christian? And I guess when I read that in a book about 14 years ago, I was sort of a bit shocked at myself because I'm going, what have I been praying about? And I realised they were sort of prayers for myself. And I think that question is a bit of a reflection on, do we have an outward heart towards people coming to faith? The other thing I had to think through was, have I given up praying for people to come to faith? Because, you just get tired of praying the same things, and God still hasn't answered our prayers for our friends or family to come to faith. And so it's really thinking about what's going on for me in terms of prayer. So Paul says, devote yourselves to prayer. Are you okay to yell out? How would you describe devote? If someone's devoted to something, what are they like? Committed. Spend your time. So it's priorities in terms of time. Consistent. Yeah. Always. Yeah. And it feels like a heart thing as well. You know, when someone's really devoted to someone else, it's like they really love them and want them. Do you know what I mean? In terms of that being devoted. And Paul is really asking us to be devoted to praying for people to come to faith. And he's saying this is a heart thing in terms of, I want you to really commit to this. And he goes on and says, being watchful and thankful, because actually what happens is when you start praying for others to come to faith, it changes you. And it's been really interesting. We've put together a ripple effect course for small groups, and I get lots of feedback from people saying, it's interesting, once I'm praying for people, all of a sudden I seem to have these opportunities. And so what it means is, actually, when we are praying for other people to come to faith, we become more watchful and thankful. And he goes on as well and says, and pray for us too, that God may open a door for our message. Now, the interesting thing is, in terms of prayer, so I've seen quite a lot of people come to faith, and it was about 99%, but it actually has come to 100%. But 100% of people have had someone praying for them when they become a Christian. They often know who it is. That's why I'm saying the 1%, he didn't know. He got baptised, and he later on found out that his neighbour had been praying for him to come to faith. A neighbour that he knew when he was a kid was still praying for him. So it's sort of weird, right? In that, and this is anecdotal because these are just people I've known, but all of them have had someone praying for them. And that's sort of the easiest thing we can do, right? Is actually just be praying. Then in verse 3 it says, and pray for us too that God may open a door for our message. And I really like this because it's saying, and I think unfortunately sometimes in evangelism we do try and push the door open a bit, but actually it's saying, like, wait on God and see what door God opens up. And I think there's a real patience in that, in terms of, and a watchfulness, right? In terms of seeing what opportunities God might open up. At university, we ran this ripple effect course, and I had a young woman in my group who was probably found social situations difficult. And she really tried hard in terms of evangelism. And she would come back and tell me the conversations she'd had. And I must admit, I've actually never seen someone so bad at evangelism. And in my mind, I'm going, maybe there is a moment when people shouldn't talk about their faith. I was actually really wrestling with it, going, if she's so bad at talking about her faith, it does feel like she's putting people off, and I just wasn't sure what to do about it. She sort of worked out she probably wasn't the best, so she kept on coming back and doing the course. She improved a little, but she kept praying. She did a undergraduate, then she did a master's, so she was at uni for 5 years. And in that 5 years, though, she made a really great bunch of friends. And by the end of her 5 years, 3 of her friends had come to faith. So this is someone who is particularly bad. And it's interesting that Paul is saying here, the first thing he doesn't say is, get good at doing evangelism. What he says is pray. And so actually God is able to answer our prayers, and he wants us to desire that and to really be devoted to praying for people to come to faith. Now, interestingly, the churches that have a real heart and prayer for the lost really do see people come to faith. And that's interesting at the moment because there's a warmness, and the churches who are really praying have just seen an explosion of people coming to faith. And the churches that don't have that same desire just have only seen a trickle so far. So can I just say this is a real heart thing, and God, wants us to really be devoted to praying. The next PR word is to proclaim. It says, so that we may proclaim the mystery of Christ for which I am in chains, and pray that I may proclaim it clearly as I should. Now, I sort of wish these 2 verses weren't in the Bible, right? Because how good would it be if we, didn't have to? But I guess the question for us then is, if every Christian New Zealander, never spoke about their faith, would anyone become a Christian? So I am pushing you theologically here. What do you reckon? Yes? No? A little amount? So we're saying yes? Yeah, that is the right answer. Because God can do it without us, right? So that was our first point, in that we actually really need to be devoted to praying. And, there are so many situations where God is already doing stuff. I was at a church and I was sitting next to this guy, and it was his first time at church. And I said, what led you to come here? And he said, well, I was smoking weed and I just felt this real presence of God, and I basically just felt like I should come. And I went, in my mind, I'm going, is he still high? Like, I just don't know. So do you know what I mean? Like, actually, God can use anything. Not that I'm saying that that's our strategy for evangelism. Okay, so why do we need to proclaim? Because actually, all right, I'll give you an example. So a friend of mine is a minister's wife, and they have 4 children, and he got a job in the country in Australia. And I don't know if you've got 4 kids, we've got 4 kids. And basically when you have 4 kids, no one really invites you out anymore. It's just sort of hectic. So she decided, I can't do much about the 4 kids, but I've got 2 things. I'm a Christian and I've got 4 kids. So I'm actually not going to talk about my faith at all, because I don't want that to be a barrier, because otherwise I'm going to find it really hard to find friends. So she's at the school and she makes these really great unbelieving friends. And after a couple of years, one of her non-Christian friends said, are you a Christian? And my friend goes, yeah, of course. Like, I'm married to the minister. I go to church every week. I have an alive sort of faith. And her friend goes, you don't really talk about it. So it's like it means nothing to you. I don't know, how did you feel when I said that? And I think the thing is, we talk about what we love. Can you hear that? So my daughter got married. I reckon it took about a year to stop talking about it. And man, if she gets grandchildren, you're all in trouble. So do you know what I mean? Like actually we talk about what we love. And I think the thing is here is it's really asking us, can Jesus be something we love and we want to talk about? So the interesting thing is the word evangelism isn't in the Bible. The evangelist is mentioned about 3 or 4 times, but there is a Greek word called euangelion that's it's actually in the Bible 77 times, but it isn't translated as evangelism. Can you have a guess how it's translated? It's good news. So isn't that interesting that actually we don't, and I think we have this idea about evangelism that we've sort of got to muster up our courage and talk about Jesus to some random person. But actually Paul is saying here, this is just good news. And so actually that's how he wants us to talk about things, is in everyday conversation, and is Jesus good news for you? All right, the next PR word is to prioritize. Be wise in the way you act towards outsiders. So it's assuming you have friends who are outside of church and outside of the faith. And then it goes on and says, make the most of every opportunity. So pretty well, if you have unbelieving friends, there are opportunities. And so part of it is being watchful and thankful. And I think the thing is, it's partly our priorities in this space. So if you have an unbelieving friend, you can't give them money to become a Christian, right? You're all nodding. No, of course you can't do that. What is it that we can give them to actually help them know Jesus? It's actually our time. And it really does take time for people to see how Jesus matters to you and how he impacts your life. And they want to see that over time. Does that make sense? They want to see that it matters, that it's authentic, and actually time is the only thing we can give people. So it's basically saying be wise in how you act. So part of it is how we live. But part of it is also making the most of every opportunity. So my husband and I, every year we work out, can we free up more time to be able to spend with unbelievers? Now you need Christian friends and you need non-Christian friends. But part of it is working out for yourself, how much do you need of both? How many Christian friends do you need to help you stay Christian and live in that? And how many non-Christians can you afford to have in your life? Now, for some of you, it will be automatically easy. But for others of you, this will be something you've got to really prioritize. So it takes about 10 years for my friends to come to faith, on average. And that's sort of catching up with them pretty regularly. And I pray for one of my friends to become a Christian every 2 years. So I don't know if you can do the math on that, but I try and have around 10 unbelieving friends. I mentioned this yesterday, where I'm actually putting time in terms of friendships. So it's around about 5 friends that I catch up with weekly to monthly, and another 5 friends that I catch up with 3 monthly to yearly. And it's about 2 walks a week. So in terms of, I'm trying to break it down for you because it sounds overwhelming, right? Who's got 10 friends? Like, do you know what I mean? Like you just go, that's ridiculous. But actually, I think you probably do, because you have friends that you see every now and again. And actually, yeah, part of that is how to prioritize. Interestingly, I have a really great ex-missionary friend. And when I see her at, you know how sometimes there's sort of Christian parties, and as soon as I see that she's there, I just gravitate towards her because she's just an unbelievably godly, fun woman. And so we always spend the whole night together. And I can feel myself at the end of the party going, we should catch up for coffee. Like, let's catch up again. But she has a real ministry to Muslims, and I want my friends and family to come to faith. So at the end of parties, what we say, see you in heaven. Because we're going to see each other in heaven. But actually, we want our priorities at this point in time to actually be outward and to thinking about the outsider. The 4th/5th point is to prepare and practice. Because here it says in verse 6, let your conversation always be full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone. And the thing is, for your conversation to always be full of grace, that actually takes a bit of time to be prepared. And partly it's because we've had some really tricky issues, don't you think, as Christians? We've had, anyway, all the tricky questions. And so actually I think we've had to take a bit of time to think about how we're going to talk about those topics. And we don't want to offend people, but actually for our conversation to be full of grace, that's going to take time and preparation. Do you get that? Yeah. And I would say that actually I spend quite a lot of time thinking about how this might land with one of my unbelieving friends. The next part of it says seasoned with salt, and there's a few ways you can interpret this, and there's quite a few commentators on this, but I recently read a commentator who said this particular way that they're talking about seasoned with salt is when, how you put, when you open a packet of chips and you just go, I'm just going to have a few chips. And then all of a sudden you've eaten the whole packet. Do you ever have that experience? Or is that just me? And what it is salt makes you want more. It just makes you thirsty for more. Now, it also makes you thirsty for water. And actually what this passage is trying to say is, do we talk about our faith in a way that people want to know more? I used to ask uni students, tell me a bit about your faith, because I'd just be going, wow, I'm so keen to hear how you got to know Jesus. It was usually the most boring minute of my life because they did a fairly rote sort of answer. It wasn't super alive in terms of their relationship with Jesus. And I just wonder if part of it is this evangelism stuff in terms of sharing our faith is partly us working out how we talk about our faith. And is it salty? Do people want to know more when we talk about Jesus? A while ago, I listened to an interview between Bono and a reporter, Bono from U2. And the reporter was asking him some questions, and I went, I'm not sure about your motives. Are you trying to try and trap Bono into saying something that becomes, worldwide news? And he asked him, one particular question was about his faith. And Bono, he probably only spoke for about 3 to 5 minutes, but he spoke about Jesus so beautifully. Like, it was simple and beautiful. And at the end, the reporter goes, it makes me want to know Jesus. Now, I don't know if Bono, that just came out naturally, or he'd been thinking about how he would talk about his faith in such a public way. And he has. It's interesting watching him over the years, how he talks about his faith. He really centres in on Jesus and really talks about the beauty of Christ. And so I wonder, can you hear this? I wonder how we talk about our faith, and do we do it in a way that just people want to know more about Jesus? And then it goes on and says, and so that you may know how to answer everyone. And I think this is where the tricky sort of questions come. And I was saying this yesterday, but a minister came up to me after one time that we were talking about evangelism, and he said, I actually have to admit that I avoid making non-Christian friends because I don't know how to answer some questions. So, and I said, well done, because you're acknowledging your fear, and part of it is just working out how you can get better at this so that you're not fearful about talking about particular topics. Do you hear that? Yeah. So part of it is we need to actually prepare and practice and be thoughtful about the next steps, which is what we were talking about yesterday. Okay, so I'm going to ask you questions. I'd love you to respond, but can you pray for people to come to faith? Yes. All right. Could you talk about what you love, and could Jesus be one of those things? Yes. Could you prioritize non-Christians? So if you're not sure. Could you prepare and practice how you might go about a salty conversation? All right. You're on. Can you hear that? You are totally on. You can do all those. And this is Paul saying, let's get back to 101 evangelism. Let's work out how we can do this well. Because and part of it is for us to reflect on why don't we? And it's interesting in New Zealand that you do have particular issues on why you don't speak about your faith as much. So part of it for us is really tackling our heart, working out why is it that we stop speaking about Jesus. And for most people, it is just crippling fear. Can you hear that? And we're nervous about what we're going to say. We're nervous about intruding in any way. We're nervous about uncomfortable conversations. I get that. But Paul is saying here, please pray. Keep praying and asking me to give you opportunities. And I don't know if you were God and you had a non-Christian who you were working in their heart. Not that we can see that, right? And he's going, who's a Christian around here that I could help them bump into? And are you one of those Christians who's ready and open? Can you hear that? Are you ready and open to be a person that God can use because he's already doing the work in someone's life? And I think for us, we want to be, don't you think, people who are ready and open. Because otherwise we really miss out on the incredible privilege it is to journey with someone to know Jesus. The thing is, God could do it without us. But actually, he loves us joining in on this mission. He wants to give you the opportunities that he can see and that he's already at work in, and he wants us to be in on this together. Can you hear that? So I guess let me pray. Lord, we are pretty fearful. And we're sorry because you're a powerful God and you are really just at work. And I know that you have been working in us as a church over the last 20 years, revealing and exposing pretty terrible things that have gone on. But actually now you are moving towards the softening of people's hearts right around Australia and New Zealand. And Lord, please help us to be ready to make the most of this opportunity. And so, Father, help us to have eyes to see what you are doing and that we are watchful and thankful. And we ask this in your name. Amen.